Well, at the moment I'm a lecturer in humanitarian and development studies, but my background profession is as a clinical psychologist, and through both that work and research that I've done in the last few years, it's tended to focus on people who may be at risk for self-harm or suicide, and interventions through services where we can provide better care and support to people who are either coming to clinical services or into hospitals with presentations like that. The project is thinking about how we can use existing technologies better with people who are in that high-risk group. So that this project is looking at the use of SMS text messaging to provide aftercare support. So the idea is that people would, who come to hospitals either with self-harm or a suicide attempt, would receive supportive SMS text messages at a monthly or 2 monthly interval for 1 year after they've presented to hospital. The project itself is a randomised control trial, so we will look at having half the group be provided with the treatment that they would usually receive, so their usual care. The second group will receive usual care plus this schedule of supportive messages. The idea being that potentially that group who receive that supportive care might come back to services in a more controlled way rather than coming back in a sort of crisis-driven way that tends to produce fairly poor outcomes for them, and it really presents quite an increased workload for emergency departments. So the idea is if these messages are effective, it will reduce that sort of burden for both of those groups. The way that we're doing it is really through the use of that randomised control trial. So by having this intervention be compared with normal treatment, we'll be able to see whether the effect of having that additional SMS text message can have an impact on those outcomes that we're really focusing on. So the idea is, and this is our hypothesis, that those people who receive the usual care plus the SMS messages, when they do come back to services, they'll come back through a more regular process through to mental health care where they contact and make a time to come and see somebody rather than coming through to those services in an acute way in a crisis. And we will know if they make more contacts that are that sort of regular kind of contact as opposed to these acute presentations. And technically the outcome measures that we're looking at is we think that group will present to emergency departments less often. That's our first measure. And also we suspect that if they do present, there'll be a much greater delay leading up to the time of that first presentation. So they're the two things that would tell us that this intervention is working. Look, the idea of this is it's really a proof of concept process. So we know that in the past, and our project follows a previous project that we had where we did mail out postcards to people. It was a similar sort of thing, and we found that it did have the sorts of effects that I was just describing. This is to see whether that translates to something like SMS messaging. And so this is a pilot study that we're conducting at Westmead, Nepean and Blacktown Hospitals, so it's a Western Sydney study. And if we find that this process is effective, it's something that we will roll out to all the local health districts throughout New South Wales, which is an exciting thing. We could potentially be looking at, within a year or two, this sort of process being available to people right across New South Wales. And that would be a fantastic outcome.